Get going. Well, I want to welcome everyone to the uh, think tank on human-centered change. Three wonderful, thoughtful people will be talking with us 15 minutes each, and then we'll talk with each other. And by the end of the time, 12:30, we'll have had a peak experience, if not in our day, certainly among the days that we've been able to take time out to do this. Uh, I'm Dave Fearon. I'm guest host today, but I want to introduce the host of hosts, Steve Cady, who will tell you a little bit about the series and the sponsors, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Dave. I welcome everybody. And I was not going to be here today, but had a change in my schedule, which allowed me to be here. So I get to sit in and participate and follow Dave. Thank you for being our guest host today. He and Ryan have done a lot of guest hosting for us, and really grateful for that. So I'm at Bowling Green State University. I'm also with Nexus for Change, and have a lot of friends and colleagues around the world. And back in, I think it was December, maybe, no, it's probably more like it's November, sent an email and said, hey, you want to be a part of a little change series? It was even before that, right? But had a lot of people call and respond and say that they could be a part of this. So we ended up with a think tank series going all the way through the month of March. So this is pretty awesome. But thank you all. And we got three wonderful people here today. With Arielle, and who's a part of the Practicing OD book, the next edition. So Arielle's got a chapter in this.
Aha.
And we've got Frank, who's also a part of it, and Birgitt, who's a part of the Change Handbook and the Collaborative Change Handbook and so forth. So thank you three for coming to share. You have such great, cool stuff that you're working on. So I look forward to hearing it and seeing all the connections. And at Bowling Green State University, we've got our doctorate in organization development and change, our master's program there, and we have a lot of wonderful people that come to these from there, our students and alumni. So just welcome everybody. And Dave, thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks,
Let's have
Steve.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay. We're ready to go. I've asked Frank if he would begin, Frank Viti, and I'm sure he'll be introducing more of his work as he shares his story, comparing CMC and ODC consulting approaches. And you know, Frank, as long as I've been out in this world, I have never learned what CMC stands for. And today I'm going to learn. So, Frank, welcome. You've got 15 minutes to dazzle us.
Well, I'm not sure about the dazzle, but I'll certainly share some information that I hope is of some value to the group today. Thank you for the invitation. So we at SuccessMap have this blended approach around certified management consulting and OD&C consulting,
Okay.
and we've brought it together simply to better serve our clients. And you have to keep in mind, SuccessMap is a boutique consultancy in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So some of the real life examples I'm sharing will be in the Canadian context. And although organizations are organizations, I do think there is a uniqueness around a scale and approaches in the Canadian context. But I hope there's some value to everyone around what I'm sharing today. I do hope, David, as per your comments, it becomes a discussion today. Just a little bit about me. I'm a graduate of the program Dr. Cady has spoken about, which is the D.ODC program at Bowling Green State University. I am a certified management consultant for 2 decades, and now a practitioner scholar, bringing some of that scholarship into our work. And I have led several organizations across the 3 sectors. And I call myself a dedicated political observer, to be polite, but I'm actually a political junkie and have worked in all 3 levels of government in Canada over my career. So in Canada, we like to acknowledge the land, our Indigenous peoples' lands, and we are today, I am sitting in the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, as well as traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Haudenosaunee peoples. We also recognize the First Nations, the Métis, the Inuit people who now call Toronto their home. And this is part of an acknowledgement that we are all committed to in Canada around rectifying some of the horrific history that we have with the First Nations Indigenous people. And this area where I'm sitting is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the First Credit First Nation. So, overview. CMC and ODC approaches. Two very different ways of going in and helping organizations deal with their challenges. One has huge history coming out of the US. The other, certified management consulting, it also has this history of coming out of the US, but there's some nuances and there's some great overlaps and real synergies when the two are brought together. Now, from a certified management consultant perspective, it's really focusing on structure, what we call structured problem solving, looking for efficiencies within operations and processes, and really driving strategic alignment within an organization. The organization development and change approach is really centered on what we call systemic change, full cultural alignment, and really looks at it from a long-term organizational development, growth, success perspective. So a little nuanced, but they approach certain challenges a little differently. What are the common threads across both CMC and ODC? Well, what's common is really there's an overarching goal, which is really to engage employees to ensure organizational success. Both emphasize this thing called stakeholder engagement, although both approaches view stakeholders a little differently, but they do make stakeholder engagement really important. Both draw on a series of tools, some diagnostic, some process, some participatory, but they both draw on diagnostic tools to measure and address organizational challenges, and both try to focus in on measurable outcomes. Now, one has a greater emphasis on this. The CMC, I think, is absolutely adamant that measurable outcomes are important. ODC also looks at measurable outcomes, but may define what these are a little differently. So, what's unique across the CMC world as we go in? Well, they're highly structured frameworks that we deploy. So depending on the needs of the organization, and these frameworks have gone as far as becoming ISO certified. They're very, very extremely structured. CMC really draws heavily on data for analysis, for operational issues, for marketing improvements. I remember doing my MBA at Kellogg and working with an IBM consultant at the time. And as we were doing our work specific to some case examples, he was able to draw on an enormous amount of data to address our particular exercises. And then I'll never forget the resources that large consultancies like McKinsey, et cetera, put into the knowledge acquisition, knowledge generation function of their work. And CMCs are very proud and should be proud of the ability to draw on this knowledge. There is in the CMC world an emphasis on short-term, very project-specific deliverables. And if anyone's interested in these slides, I'm very happy to share them through the think tank, through David and Steve. Very happy to share these slides. They're very project-specific deliverables. And really the CMC primarily focuses on engaging with senior executives at the C-suite level. That is the bread and butter of CMC consulting. Now, if you look at the unique approaches across organization development and change, it's increasingly systematic. It's intentionally focused on people, how people are organized or structured, and the business processes that people and their structure are engaged in. It's a really unique in its approach around drawing on action research when they're developing iterative interventions. And my partner and I work extensively in action research to drive transformation within organizations. OD&C takes a long-term perspective that prioritizes employees, their growth, and their adaptability to change. And OD&C has a heavy reliance on participative and dialogic methods to really foster the buy-in. So I would argue that OD&C is incredibly bottom up and more inclusive in our interventions. Now let's look at comparing OD&C and CMC along 4 vectors. In terms of the focus, CMC really looks at operational efficiencies, strategy development, strategy deployment, etc. Where ODC in terms of focus is on systemic change and really looking at cultural and people alignment. In terms of time frame, very short term, CMC, most projects are cut and dry, get in, get out, where the ODC approach takes a longer term perspective. CMC uses structured diagnostics. OD&C uses action research and participatory dialogic methods. And in terms of engaging stakeholders and people, CMC really is leadership focused, and OD&C really tries to take a system-wide approach. Now, what are the differentiators in OD&C? This is something that we'd like to share. I'm quoting Steve Cady, who was on the call today, and his work with Shop and Dave Bright and Sean Otto around a unified competency framework for OD&C. Really, the differentiators are things like use of self and the ability of an individual to draw on their best self to intervene and support organizations. OD&C takes the time to do process consultation. OD&C practitioners draw on research and evidence and incorporate it in their work, depending on what they're doing. They're really the champions of collaborative change and not top-down change. They're really the champions of cultural transformation, adaptive capacity. They make person-centered care or human-centric approaches a priority, and they really believe strongly in participatory co-creation of solutions within organizations. These are really the true differentiators with the ODC approach. My partner and I draw heavily on all 8 of these when we're working with organizations. Now, what's the synergy between the 2 approaches? Well, OD&C provides a systemic long-term vision by aligning people, processes, and structures within either existing strategic goals or newly developed goals. And at SuccessMap, we use ODC approaches to build strategy. And it really surprises a lot of boards of directors and a lot of senior leaders when we propose to them that strategy should be built bottom up and using lots of dialogic and different participatory processes. And I have to say, objectively, our clients are very happy when we bring in OD&C processes to drive and build strategy. CMC delivers tactical, data-driven solutions to execute on whatever strategic goals of the organization, of its vision, mission, and values. So it's a little different, but both bring extreme value. If we look at this another synergy, it's really holistic problem solving. You know, OD&C addresses broad organizational challenges, for example, let's say cultural transformation or leadership development, where the certified management consulting world targets specific operational strategic issues. So we've engaged in all of this stuff, including market entry analysis. How do you optimize a process, mainly technology? Or how do you amalgamate business units when divided business units actually shouldn't exist? So for example, we had a client that had an education department and also had a science department. And when you dig a little deeper using OD&C methods, you realize that they were probably created because of people issues or people problems. And the CMC in us helps us to support the client in bringing the 2 units together and building the data-driven argument around why these 2 business units should exist. as one. So in terms of building organizational resilience, which is an extremely hot topic in today's age of rapid change, OD&C really tries to build on internal capacity for long-term adaptability and growth, where the CMC really focuses on immediate results by implementing efficient, effective, and agile solutions. So a real case example, one of the clients we worked with is as a glass manufacturer, Canada's largest glass manufacturer, and they're experiencing, which is a common problem with many of our clients today, declining employee engagement, and they believe that it could be contributing to employee turnover. So typically, the OD&C consultant will facilitate a series of dialogues and focus groups with those employees at all levels, not just at the C-suite level, at all levels, to try to understand the underlying causes of this disengagement. The OD&C consultant will then look at exploring organizational culture, values, and norms that may be contributing to the problem. We would develop an emerging themes report and share that report with everyone that's been consulted, all the stakeholders within the organization. Then we co-create and sit down, and those same teams design and implement interventions that promote a more inclusive, collaborative, and empowering culture. And we would also, from an operational implementation perspective, be engaged in continuously evaluating the impact of the recommended interventions. Now, from a CMC perspective, it's short-term, we call it down and dirty. We would conduct a rapid assessment of employee satisfaction using our own developed tools. And we would probably do a couple of strategic interviews. We would come up with key drivers of disengagement. The consultants would do this. We would recommend a series of targeted interventions to address these drivers, maybe perhaps compensation adjustments, perhaps training programs for managers. We would come up with a series of recommendations, and the C-suite would implement, and we would be asked to implement and monitor the impact of these interventions. So very little different. What the magic in our work, what I would recommend is drawing on the two approaches depending on the needs of the client. So if we are working with a mining company that's dealing with potential tariffs, this is real, tariffs to Donald Trump tariffs on Canada, they need to adjust quickly. They need to understand their market opportunities, their diversification of market in terms of clients they can serve. Probably we would do a hybrid around CMC and OD&C around giving them a pivot plan or some kind of strat around how to address this threat. So it all depends on the need of the client. Both approaches, we would argue, are essential if you want to develop a sustainable organization that achieves continuous success. And we would argue by integrating OD&C and CMC, you're leveraging the core strengths of both approaches. And with the complexity of organizations, we would argue that an integration of both approaches is probably what consulting should be doing. It should be coming together. We strongly believe, and I know we may be biased, but we strongly believe that OD&C in Canada has been underappreciated and underutilized. And we keep advocating for this hybrid approach when it comes to helping Canadian organizations survive and thrive through some difficult times. And with that, Dave, I will stop.
We'll be definitely addressing questions after the three presentations. I know there's a lot of thought that's already stirred up in me, but to be fair to the process, we'll go on in a few moments to Arielle. But I do want to ask one question, Frank, before we go ahead, and that is, how does one go about becoming a certified management consultant?
Well, it is a formal accreditation, micro-accreditation process. There is a series of, there must be 5 years of practice, but there's also a series of courses that must be undertaken, very typical of any micro-credentialing program. There's 44 countries who adhere to management consulting standards. The Canadian Association of Management Consultants is obviously the Canadian body, but the US is quite strong, and many other Western democracies and others are part of this network of management consulting. So a series of 5 or plus years of experience, a series of courses, and a final examination by your fellow peers will give you the accreditation.
So that would be something that some of the folks who are building a dual career, as you have,
Yes.
could look at. And then also, if you're forming a practice or a firm and you find CMC qualified consultants, bring them on in. And according to your design, I think it makes a lot of sense. Okay, thanks very much. We'll be back to you. I'm sure there'll be questions, but I wanted to make sure that one was addressed. Next will be Arielle Sullivan, who is going to be looking at nature. Not just human nature, but us as humans in nature and a lot of other aspects. Welcome, Arielle. You got 15 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna try to keep this like more high level because there's so many like areas we could go deep in, but I think just for this group and for this conversation, it's just a more like why this topic, where is it coming from, and like what's the opportunity in it. And so I'm going to be talking about something called regenerative system change, and really in the context of aligning leaders strategically for a future world that we can have for 7 generations ahead of us, since we are kind of at a crisis, kind of at an inflection point as a civilization. There's a lot of change happening around us.
Yes, indeed.
So just a little bit of background about me. I'm an OD professional. That's my training. I came from a lineage of OD consultants. Stephen Rolland, my dad was Rolland Sullivan. He worked with Steve on the Practicing OD series. And I kind of found OD on my own through actually experiencing something with him, a large group event at Airbus in 2010. And I saw something in the power of large groups. I felt like there was power in the process of convening. And for the last 15 years, I have been doing internal and external consulting. And so really more of the ODC approach that Frank's talking about. I did do 1 year of external consulting, which was a little bit of the more traditional management consulting approach. So it's like I kind of understand the differences of the two. And I think where I'll be going today is a little bit more of the ODC lens. But I've done, just when you think about the body of work, like it's strategy and leadership alignment, it's org design and org transformation. And this is a new level now that I'm unlocking, which is multi-stakeholder network convening through the use of large groups. So I've kind of gone from the team working with leaders in corporations, doing the C-suite leadership effectiveness, like expanding that out to the structure and the convening at the org level in service of the culture that's needed. And now I'm kind of on my own as an independent, and I'm working in the space in between organizations. And sometimes that looks like community engagement work, or sometimes it's like cross-sector leadership convenings in service of kind of like a shared need, a shared urgent pressing need to come together. And I feel in light of like natural disasters and global instability, like there is a need to transcend the boundary of our organizations and actually work across organizations, because some of these systems problems are much bigger. They require more actors and more leaders at the table to be in alignment. And that's also what's coming up for me. I'm like, oh, like I'm not just convening people, I'm aligning leaders in a process across systems. And that's very
nice.
complex. And so, yeah, I won't go through all of these, but like there's perpetual stress on our systems right now from many different angles. It's having us, I think, confront the paradigms from which we operate from. And like, what is our role to the resources that we use? What is our role to one another? to how we think about work. What is our relationship with work, especially with AI coming in? Do we have to work in the same ways that we have for most of our lives? And yeah, there's this opportunity, I think, for reflection and questioning. And in 2020, I discovered the regenerative movement, and it was familiar to me because I come from the field of OD and systems and large group, and all of that has to do with complexity science. And nature actually operates with the same rules of complexity science. Nature is a complex adaptive system. And there's a lot that we can learn from nature in terms of how it works and how it interrelates to itself to be thriving and abundant and resilient. And in my research and in my exploration at this time, like a lot of the regenerative thought leaders, they talk about the shift from the machine paradigm to the living systems paradigm. And I think a machine paradigm is like, I feel like the management consulting, like it's more linear. It's more of a linear approach. It's like you can clearly organize it into parts and pieces and kind of recommend a solution. And there's a little bit more I hope to control the process, right? And so, yeah, it's more linear. It's complicated. And I don't know if you've heard of the Sinafin model, but like when a complicated problem versus a complex problem, like if it's a complicated problem, that's when you call up the McKinseys of the world, and they can be like this, we're gonna sort this out for you, and here's the solution. But when you're in a complex system, like you can't necessarily control or predict outcomes. There's too many moving pieces and parts and layers and levels of system. And that's really more of this like living systems paradigm, because in nature, there's moving pieces and parts and levels and layers of system. And so, yeah, we're kind of like shifting. We're shifting into this new paradigm where we're looking at more non-linear interactions through interdependent, diverse relationships. Like when I talk to people that are in corporations, and I'm like, what's going on in there? Like it's been a while since I've been internal, and I'm like, org structure is more of a network now. Like there are multiple reporting relationships. Like yes, hierarchy still comes into play with decision making and some sort of process clarity. But I think like with our technology, like we are seeing the web. We're seeing the web a lot more clearly. And we're seeing the complexity. Just when you think about like who influences change, and you do a social network analysis, like it's not always the people that you think would be influencing change. And so this way of thinking really is self-sustaining. Cells are self-sustaining and require less energy over time to like function and thrive. And so it's really like creating conditions for flourishing and honoring the diversity in the system. Because like when you think about your gut biome, like the more diverse your gut is, like the healthier you are. And so it's same thing. It's like the more different types of thinking in a conversation, like the more robust the dialogue and the better the outcome. And really, like we're really honoring the uniqueness of each person's independent contribution in this interdependent web. And we're all sharing information and resources back with each other. And then there's hubs that have high degree of resources exchange, energy exchange, and like those hubs are like where we intervene for maximum leverage, systems leverage, and impact. And so a lot of this has been like innate in OD, I think. But you know, this is if you just look at it from an organizational standpoint. So the machine paradigm says an organization is a structure that uses power to apply forces and control movement to perform an intended action. And a living systems paradigm says that an organization is a holistic system capable of self-regeneration and self-maintenance that emerges from each of the unique developing members of the organization and their interdependent relationships. So what I do is I apply regenerative design principles to my consulting. Like that is how I've been shifting in the last 5 years. And I create frameworks that are built with complexity science, because change, like I think some of our change tools are built with like a linear paradigm. And we have the opportunity to like unlock like a higher degree of emergence and like working with the intelligence of complexity if we're able to design frameworks that are built with that same science. And so like these principles are found in nature. They're called living systems principles. Again, many of them are similar to what we know of OD anyway. That's why this has been so intuitive for me, I think, to move into. But so the interdependence is like, shows that all of the relationships are important in a network, in a web, in a system, in an organization. Adaptive and evolutionary, we're going through adaptive, iterative cycles of learning and reflection, and we're evolving. Developmental, we're inherently developing like the unique essence and potential of each person. Again, so very humanistic. Holism, we're seeing the whole, we're operating in systems. Uniqueness is like we're honoring the unique contribution that each person has in the system. And nodal design is kind of what I was talking about. Is like we're intervening at those nodes where there's high resources and high opportunity for leverage or impact. So this is kind of coming through to me, and I'm calling it regenerative systems change. There's not a lot. There's stuff out there on this, but I think it's like more. I think it's emerging as its own field and movement. And there's a lot of OD folks that are like that have kind of found this. OD for Life is a group in Europe that has kind of adopted and incorporated some of this into their philosophy. They call it a maniflexo, not a manifesto, because it's iterating and adjusting. And so this is adopting a living systems or regenerative approach to unleashing transformation and untapped potential in complex adaptive systems. And like you can really apply this like at any level of system. And that's kind of like what I've been kind of experimenting with over the last 5 years. I do believe this is a turning point. Like this is my own perspective. I actually pulled this slide into this presentation last minute. I shared this with my Pepperdine network maybe a year ago, a year and a half ago, because this is, I think, is important. Like I feel like we're shifting. Like for me, it's not just about humanistic values. It's like it's about ecocentric values of we're not just considering the human, but we're considering the human and the human's potential in the context of its broader environment. And so that's its community, that's its the living system, it's the natural ecosystem. There's a consulting firm called Regenesis, and the first thing they're a regenerative consulting firm. The first thing they do is they understand the geography of the region. What's unique? What's the unique calling of this geography? And how does that relate to the community? And how does that relate to the project and the role of the consultant in the project? And so, so we're honoring the foundation in behavioral science in the complexity, systems change, like the authentic relationships in OD, and we're leveraging this in our next era or iteration of OD. We're shifting out of humanistic, and we're not shifting out of it because we always will be centered in it, but we're expanding to more place-based or ecologically centered values. And then we have this opportunity to bring life and vitality to a wider system. And we have agency as consultants around the nature of the interventions we facilitate in the next 50 years. So like the next 50 years is vital, like in terms of like, where are we going to go? Like what's going to happen? I think everybody's really curious. And who's better who is better positioned than a change consultant that understands systems, that understands leaders, that understands decision making, that understands change efforts, right, to make an impact. So so we have this opportunity to apply these principles in the area of strategy, leadership development, organization design, multi-stakeholder alignment, and network convening to really create this like upward cycle of positive change so that our systems are more resilient and abundant, and we have a future for our children for 7 years. This is a framework that I put together. I don't think I have time to go over it, but maybe if
just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, like maybe if you're interested in learning more, we can talk about it in the breakout. But this was kind of like the compilation of my studies. Like I studied with different thought leaders and elders in the space and kind of put together a framework that's built with complexity science that operates at the level of self and also the level of system to kind of unleash that potential. Last thing I'll just say quickly, I think I have like a minute and 15 seconds left. So I'm doing this in trans org work. So like my last project was working with the US compostables system, and we convened over 110 organizations in Denver. This was in September, because the whole compostables industry is at a crisis right now. It's not working. And so we brought together, yeah, like all these different stakeholder groups, and we actually did a future search process with them and got them on in alignment and kind of directionally pointing towards the future. And a lot of the principles, a lot of the aspects of large group, like use some of these systems-based regenerative design principles. And so like there's an opportunity here to like work across systems and sectors to convene and align stakeholders and develop more stronger collaborative networks in service of some of these pressing challenges that we are facing as a society. And a lot of my work, like what I'm finding it become is it's working on waste prevention, it's working on water, it's working on green energy, compostables, homelessness. Like I'm just finding myself in the type of work. And so for me, it's like the regenerative systems change, like it's the process that you use, but it's also the context, and context is so important. So what is the project? And like, I want to be working on work that's like helping to bring in a future that's regenerative, that's not extractive, and that's like kind of honoring the place-based values and humanistic values. So yeah, if that's interesting for you, feel free to reach out and we can talk more.
Yeah, and we'll be able to share those slides on request.
Sure.
Yeah. I want to say before I introduce Birgitt that it seems to me that you are regenerating yourself, Arielle, in this work.
Yeah.
You've gone through a number of intellectual and personal transformations in order to bring us what I think is a pretty exciting future for the fields.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. Birgitt Williams is the last person to share her perspectives. She's been involved in nice overlap with both of the other sessions, particularly in the more recent one, as I remember, Birgitt, from our authors jams that we had over the last couple of years for the folks who published in the Collaborative Change Library. So Birgitt, welcome. Introduce yourself and have your 15 minutes of fame.
Thanks. Sorry. I need to enter this very, very slowly, this speaking. So what I'm going to ask each of you to do for a moment, we've taken in a lot of information and we listen with all parts of ourselves. So if you could take a moment with me to get into this space of our whole self and just put a hand on your forehead and just think something like, my mind is at ease with what I'm taking in. And then put a hand on your heart and say, I'm listening with my heart, even though this is a think tank, my heart's thinking too. And then put two hands on your belly and say, and I'm present with my whole self. Just taking a breath, because I think it's a lot to take in 3 back-to-back speakers. So just that pause, because each of you is present within this. So way back when in the 80s, that's 1980s, a long, long time ago and far, far away, I really wanted to work at helping to change systems. It was my quest. And that was before systems theory came to be known. But I knew that we couldn't make progress in the world if we didn't change our systems. My quest today is different. And my quest, my question that is motivating me, it is in many ways related to what Arielle was speaking about, but my quest is what is my understanding? What is our understanding of what our individual and collective natures require of us. So it's putting ourselves into that picture at this time with the 7 generations that have gone before, and the ancestral wisdom and what Arielle referred to as doing something in the now for the 7 generations that follow. What are our individual and collective natures requiring of us? So as some answer to this question, I've been working at this particular part of the answer for some time. I am very, very committed to nourishing a culture of leadership. And that is what I'm speaking about today. How do we nourish a culture of leadership? So as I began looking at leaders and leadership and talking to people about leaders and leadership, I was fascinated by how many people, as soon as you mention the word leader, how many people think of that word as something that they perceive as bad. Like, don't talk to me about leaders, and then they've got a story of something that they don't like. So I've been fascinated cross-culturally, because I've worked in many countries, the perception of the word leader. I then started talking with executive teams and leadership teams, or sometimes they called themselves management teams. And I said, what is your common understanding of what a leader is? And we did some activity, and it turned out that there was no common understanding almost all of the time. Then I went and I said, so now what's your understanding as a leadership team of what is leadership? Is leadership something that is different than being a leader? And again, if I've got a 12-member executive team I'm talking with, they'll have 12 different perspectives, usually, of what is leadership. And that's a beginning point. It sounds overly simple, and yet it has had significant impact in what follows. To take the time to come in any group like that to understanding what is a leader, what's leadership that's different than management, what is leadership. And I will always offer that leadership is a verb. Taking leadership is a choice. And then the response that often comes to me is, Birgitt, do you think that everyone is capable of leadership? And my answer is always, yes, absolutely. One question that I ask is, to people in general, do you take leadership of your life? And sometimes people say yes, and sometimes people say no. And then I'll say to them, well, if you're not taking leadership of your life, who or what has taken leadership of your life? That stimulates an interesting conversation. And then that takes us to a common understanding that leadership is in each person if they so choose to use it. And that took me into thoughts, and what I talk about with organizations that are interested in this is that we need to have a shift in leadership paradigm. And I remember Stephen Covey talking about the shift from managing to leading, that they were different functions. And then there was the understanding that we offer leadership so that people will follow. And I think even as children, we're cultured into the paradigm, at least in North America, of leading so people will follow. There's a children's game of follow the leader. We're cultured to follow the leader. And I believe strongly, and this would support very much what Arielle was speaking about, is that we need, at least I think so, we need to adopt a leadership paradigm of leading so people will lead. And so then I propose this for people I'm working with. And I say, what do you think of that? Does that make sense to you? Do you want people to actually take leadership? And there isn't a big hurrah, hurrah. This is what we want people to do. It's yes, we think so, but this feels really scary. Okay, that's a beginning place. Let's look at the fear that comes with leading so that people will lead. I shift into a period of readiness, and usually that's first with the senior leaders. They need to decide if they're willing to make that shift to leading so that people will lead. And that's accompanied by a willingness to nourish a culture of leadership in their organization. This goes far beyond just having people being, engaging people or having people in participatory meetings. This is actually engaging the leadership in people. And in this readiness phase, we explore how much space within the organization can be created for people to use their leadership. Because there is some space in every organization that is a given, something that's non-negotiable, and it's fixed, it's managed. And there is always space for people to use their leadership if we are explicit at that leader level of creating the space, identifying the space. It is possible for people to actually exercise their leadership. And I'm not talking occasionally, I'm talking every day. Leaders have given feedback to me that say that getting these givens clear, to get the space clear, to identify that space for leadership of everybody has actually been some of the hardest work they've ever done. They, at the end of the day, there's a lot of expression of gratitude that they did that hard work. So
about 3 minutes, Birgitt.
Thanks. That takes us to another aspect of leading so that people will lead. Let's not assume that the people in an organization want to exercise their leadership. We're asking them to show up differently within a culture of leadership. We're asking people to choose to lead when there's a default condition experience of following the leader. So people need to know from the senior leader team that it's actually real that we want people to take leadership. And I'm going to leave it there. We need to engage people. We need to make the shift together into a leadership paradigm that's different than the one that we've been used to. And I believe that this is absolutely necessary. I've been using this for the past 25 years. But it's absolutely necessary to have a different leadership paradigm in our current complex environment.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
leave it
wow.
there.
We've had, folks, we've had 3 very evocative conversations of one to us, and now we'll have a conversation with each other. but I want to congratulate Birgit for tenacity, for staying with this quest and question. And I think all three have said this is the time, the pivot point, the hour before the wave breaks. And so as we talk with each other, get acquainted quickly. We'll have about 10 minutes. But then ask the question, what has moved your needle in this three-way presentation toward the direction of regeneration and the blending of the hard sort of science of management and the what we used to call soft world of organization development. So have at it. Heather will put you in groups, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes. And you three folks want to stay with me, or you can join a group and have some fun. Which, yeah, I think we've already got you in. No, we're a group. Okay. Heather, are they all out there now? How about Deshanda? Looks like they're in progress. Okay.
Yeah, this is good. I'm here, and
Yeah.
Arielle will be here, and Heather's here, and Frank's
Oh,
here.
there goes
It's really
Deshanda.
good.
I just want to make sure she got tucked in.
Yeah,
And Steve, you'll
Okay.
sure stay.
Yeah. No, I was really enjoying that, and I was chatting with Arielle on the side because in our book here that with the practicing OD book, Arielle, your chapter is really good in referencing this kind of concepts that you were talking about today. So that was really good. So I literally went into, because I can do that as editor, I can go in and make a little change. So I adjusted and put a little citation of you in the chapter that Frank was referencing around competencies in OD.
Yeah.
And what prompted me is to think is that what I did is content analyzed 8 professions competency frameworks and came up with 14 competencies that the 8 share. And so, Arielle, this is for you, this is for your edification here. Just kind of explain why I was so excited when I was hearing what you were talking about. And so, and then what we did is we then looked at what does OD&C do that's not shared by those 8 professions, and that's OD&C, SHRM, ATD, PSYOP, facilitators, coaching, change management, professional, the 8 kind of professional associations and so forth that relate to that. And what was interesting, and what I think you did, what you said is what as I talked about, what makes OD&C unique compared to the other human-centric professions is this nonlinear living systems approach.
Yeah.
And so I quickly put that sentence in there and put a citation. I wanted to cite you in there and say that. So I cited today's talk in that, and also your chapter, mentioned your chapter. But I wanted to, I think that really captures the essence of what OD&C does. Is it really does bring this living systems nonlinear perspective approach, if you will. So it's like a human-centered living systems, centric approach, And I know what you're saying is it's not just about the human. It's about all living things, are connected, and that regenerative piece. So anyway, I appreciated that. So that kind of wanted to share that.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you, Frank, for that very clear set of comparisons. And I think what you also advocated is, okay, here's one side, here's the other side, and then let's take down the line in the middle, which drew us into Arielle's perspective and her own transformation from being probably more methodical, I guess should be the word, early on, and then seeing that that's not enough. And Arielle, I want to say that your latest of the 3 sections, the one where you're bringing networks of people together, I haven't seen that before. Maybe I'm just a a layman here in this world, but over the years that I have studied organization and management, I've often wished that we could do more of that beyond the chambers of commerce and other sort of evolved organizations that do that. And here in particular, given Steve's point, I've been active in the organization behavior side of things for years, and we've had conferences and we have journals, but there's so many parallel organizations that are also looking at organizations, and I would love to see the network of those organizations having combined opportunities to share ideas and experiences and see where we have some connecting points. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's critical for the field of OD to do that.
Yeah.
You know, to cross
And we could be the side of not the side, we could be the element of doing the convening, bringing the management, educators and certified management consultants in to have conversations with people who, in some ways, when I was working in a business school, we'd always say, oh, you're the soft side of business to me in organization behavior. And I said, well, where's the hard side? Oh, that's accounting, finance, technology. I think if we're talking about difficult degrees of difficulty to enact change, I'll take hard over soft because, as Frank has pointed out, you can line things up and find where the pinch points are, unpinch them, and the process will work. But when it comes to people and what Birgitt talked about, people accepting the actuality that they can lead, and then finding the space to do it and the permission, that's very old, it's wild new waters in a way. And yet I don't think much of the changes that we're looking to have happen for regeneration are going to happen unless the individual sees herself or himself in the cause of change, not just the top guys. What do you think, Frank? I'm yakking too much.
No, Dave, listen, I'm totally aligned. In our work, the biggest problem we see is the people and structure problems that are impacting the process problems.
Mm-hmm.
We get called in to address the process problems, and then we have to bring to the attention of our clients the people and structure issues that are causing the problems.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we bring that uniqueness. We try, but very often our clients don't make human-centric a priority. They may go down the road of human-centered in terms of corporate social responsibility, or they may go down the road of perhaps some environmental values. But the human-centric, the people part, is new to most organizations. It doesn't matter if it's government, if it's nonprofit, if it's for-profit. It's new. It's a new thing. And so we have an obligation, I think, as consultants, to point out with evidence, and that's why we do lots of our work is action research oriented. We bring the evidence that says, you know, co-creation or collaborative change, when you involve people in the solution generation, and then on the implementation side, you'll have better outcomes. And when you can back it with some data from the world of OB most often, Dave, it really is a powerful message around driving transformation within teams or organizations. Arielle, I loved your thinking around going beyond the stakeholder that's internal, that there is this community of stakeholders that have to also be considered.
Yeah.
And some of the larger players have the resources to do that. The smaller, the SMEs don't have those luxuries. What we can do, though, as OD&C consultants and say, at least let's map the stakeholders.
Yeah.
And it's
So
not just, right, at least, and it's not just your investors or it's not just your donors. Let's go a little bit beyond that. And that helps us build really strong mission, vision, and values, for example. So the human-centric, for me, is critically important in our work. There are great efficiencies that you can draw on when you're a CMC. But I think bringing the two approaches together is just a more powerful punch when you're trying to help an organization deal with a crisis.
Birgit, what's your
Yeah,
thought?
what I would like to say is back about 1981 or 82, there was like the field of OD, and then within that was a small subset that was organizational transformation. And much of the field of OD didn't, like, it was a small subset that were really interested in what did it take to transform something. Yeah, I won't get into that more. Then we got into a small subset that started to look at large systems interventions, large scale or whole scale, whatever we want to call that, as an approach to actually accomplishing transformation. Transformation is not the easiest type of change to accomplish. So I believe that at this time, I know myself, I come from an intersection of that organizational transformation part of OD and large systems with ancestral wisdom. I had the great good fortune of spending time with people on the Six Nations Reserve up in Ontario for a long time. I also grew up in Canada, Frank.
I thought I knew I liked you too.
And then the intersection point, like it also is holistic. And holistic includes going deeply to the roots. I think this whole field of OD has to shift. That's my personal perspective. I love the regenerative approach.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
yeah, it's a hopeful, it's a hope, and it can be fulfilled. I think the opposite in that spectrum is use it and it's done, or you start a business, but if it doesn't make money in the first 5 years, either you flip it or you drop it. So that whole notion of disposal and end is so different than what you three work for, which is long term. You meant it, Frank, and you each in your own way talk about keeping organized life going is indefinitely, 7 generations ahead. So I think that's one of the reasons I've always been attracted to being with people like you and Steve and the folks that he's brings together, is that there's a great deal of interest in renewal and regeneration and refreshing. Certainly some things seem to die, but then I think they move into other states, including humans. So anyway, how much time do we have left on the breakout, Heather? I haven't been watching that.
I think we're about time. It's been about 10.
About time?
Mhm.
Well, I thank you so much for the thoughtfulness, and there's synergy here. There is synergy.
Thank you
And,
for your thoughtful facilitation. I just really enjoy your presence and your listening and how you connect us all. It's just very lovely.
well, I believe an old dog can learn new tricks, and I've learned many from each of you. And I think our followers here today did have too. Now, my challenge to them is to go from being followers to leaders, right? Like Fergus say, all right, you followed the line of thinking. Now take it out and lead with it. So they should be back now, aren't they? Here they are. Oh, it's still in progress. I'm I have to go to mute in a
There's a
minute
time
because
down.
they're tuning my piano downstairs. Just a minute. Oh,
45 seconds.
okay, great.
They'll be forced back.
I'm glad the timing was that he didn't start doing this at the beginning of our session, but yeah, I've made a lot of changes in our home now that I'm living here alone as a widower. And one of them was to not get rid of this piano that my wife loved, but have it tuned. And that's what's happening downstairs. If they could only tune me, then I'd be a happy guy.
You can tune a piano, but you can't tune a fish, Dave.
No, I think I get brain freeze on that one, Frank. You must be a Mainer, not a Canadian. We use those puns all the time. There we go. Okay. Welcome back, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, you were in your discussion groups. Arielle and Bergen and Frank and I and Steve were in ours. And but we're eager now to know what you've thought. Birgitt talked about how we seem to have fallen into the pattern of being followers through all the conditioning we've had from schooling and parental influence on. But I think what I'd like to ask you is, what will you take away from this session today and put into your leadership? You are a leader, you know that, but what will you lead with that you can take out of this conversation today, either in your discussion groups or the three presentations? So we'll start with any volunteers. You can just put up your hands, your react hand, so I won't miss you. It's this little guy down here next to the chat. It's called React, and you just click raise hand, up it goes. Okay. Anyone want to raise their hand and talk about what you're leading with as you leave this session? Okay, Jennifer.
I really enjoyed, Birgitt, the concepts that you brought forward. I think they're so important. Are we creating a space for people to lead? Because I think it has so much to do with human flourishing when people have the opportunity to express their best self in their work and to maybe have that opportunity to lead others, no matter what their position is in the organization. And I just think it's a great concept that I haven't really actively thought of in that context exactly before. So I really appreciate that. And thank you for that. I thought all of the presentations were just so great and so interesting, and all kinds of thoughts going on in my head. So thank you for that. And I'd love to know, Birgitt, if you've ever, if you have any examples of this working very well in organizations that, you said you've been doing it for 25 years. I'd love to know how this has been working in those organizations, just very briefly, if you had a minute.
I can't do it briefly. Unfortunately, I can't do that briefly. There's lots of examples, but one of what I would like to bring to your attention is that the body of work that I founded is called Genuine Contact. And we actually have an international genuine contact organization. And we ourselves practice what we talk about. And so we don't call ourselves a community of practice. We call ourselves a learning playground. And so we're experimenting with this all the time. We are sharing stories. It's a great place to come and listen to the stories. So just email me and I would help you get connected to listen to people. But in our process as a learning playground, there's that which works, that which doesn't. And my last summary is leaders who lead in this way, the formal leaders, because I'm not dispensing with formal leaders. They always say it's the hardest form of leadership that they've ever done.
And I also loved your thought about, do something now for the next 7 generations. I think that's just a beautiful way of framing what we should all be doing as OD&C consultants. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Jane, I think your hand was up next.
Well, actually, Jennifer said it. So I think the same thing resonated with me, which was, creating the space for yourself, but also creating this and being at peace with yourself, but actually also creating the space for others to affect change. How many times do we ask people to lead, talk about it, but then not create the space? That was the aha for me, which is sometimes we get halfway there, great intent, then don't follow through with the space. So that really resonated with me. And I thought the 3 presentations built really nicely as well. So it was great for my personal reflection. And the 7 generations, I work in a decommissioning nuclear. So you can imagine that takes a lot longer to decommission than it did active service as such. So what you're doing, what we're talking about here really resonated with me. So I'd just like to thank all 3 speakers.
And that's an important word, resonate. And if we're going to take something out and lead with it, it has to have that resonation inside of us. And sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, but it's great when it does. Tommy, what's your question or thought?
What resonated with me is that it's all about purpose. And to realize what that means, the shared purpose, we need slowing down. So I very much liked the little exercise of Birgitt of slowing down and feel our heart. And so what's our shared purpose and how do we create space to work on that purpose? So that's what I take away.
Ryan, and then, you have to put your hand. All right. But Ryan.
Of the many things in the 7 generations and the complexity conversation, which I'd love to get into, the thing that really resonated for me was Birgitt calling out the fact that even a small group of folks don't really have the same definition of what leader means or leadership means or anything like that. And I think that's really telling that there's this language. Do you mean authority? Do you mean hierarchy? Do you mean choosing responsibility? I think the precision of language in any group of any size for any purpose, Tommy, I think that's there too, is that it's very important to know what we're talking about and why we're talking about it before any choices to move forward towards whatever direction, come to agreement about what the language is and what do you mean by what you're saying, and be okay to say it without sanction.
Thank you. Benu, you're on mute.
I have 3 questions we have discussed with Carol. I mean, both of us were discussing about the 3 presentations. I have 1 question for Frank regarding CMC and OD. What sort of a contract, because I'm looking from the practitioner's point of view, what sort of a contract difference is there between CMC and OD&C, what you do? And do you find any differences in the private sector, public sector, or civil society organizations in that context? As a practitioner, what will be my theory and what sort of a paradigm I'm looking for when I'm trying to bring about change? Because both in OD and CMC, you need hard data and soft data. So OD&C, there are a lot of things which we work on the soft data, but it is also true that when somebody is hiring me, and you know very well as an established consultant, that people will hire me if I add value to the organizations at some point. We need a space for human transformations in organizations. But if I can't add value, then first time they may call me, second time they'll say, okay, bye. I don't want to hear rhetorics and all that, because what is ultimately at the end of the day bottom line? I mean, what way I can bring the changes. So in that context, I was very much impressed. Also the second and third part of, I'm not going detailing the 2 presentations, but let me tell you the facts of the central banks of the advanced countries. You know that all the central banks in the advanced economies and even in the BRICS economies, they are having problem. They have the best of that expertise, finance, economics. You can see in paid also. I have interacted with many of the people in World Bank, IMF, and also other central banks of the world in Washington, D.C. Best of the expertise, but they are very much puzzled that what they should do in the outside unknown situation, which Marvin King, Bank of England governor, said once a few years back in his book, very nice book. So in the unknown situation, what sort of a change paradigm should come out of these three presentations for human transformation? I can tell anything and everything, but in order to grapple that situations, what should be my takeaway, or what should be my tools and techniques? Third is the leadership. There are as many leaders, as many leadership. I was talking about Tony Blair's book on leadership and Henry Kissinger's book on leadership. I like Henry Kissinger's book because it is well documented with a lot of case studies. So in that, he has also given, some of the characteristics of the leader, which is very inspiring. I want to know from Birgitt that when you are thinking of the collaborative change and culture of leadership, are you thinking of something of the followership only also, or only on the leadership, command and control type, but not about the followers? So what should be the contents for in that discussion, followership, culture of followership? That's all. Thank you. Wonderful presentations.
You're on mute, Dave. Dave, you're on mute. Can you hear me?
No wonder I was shouting at Bennu and he didn't hear me. Frank, what about differences in contracts? Because when they're employing you, it's clear what you're going to get from the CMC, but not so clear on the OD.
Well, let me clarify just based on some of our experiences. Jennifer, my business partner, and my wife is on our session today. Maybe she can jump in. But based on my experience, having been a leader and driving transformation within organizations, and Carol and I, Dr. Gorlick and I, was also on the call, have debated this one, and I think we've come to an agreement and consensus. But generally speaking, there is a high emphasis. Doesn't matter who we get engaged by. It could be government agency, for-profit, nonprofit, religious organizations. There's if we deploy OD&C, which really places emphasis on human-centric, participatory, dialogic methods, strategic collaboration, collaborative change, there can be the danger of getting stuck on process and not looking at driving outcome. All our clients want resolution to some pressing challenge. They don't call us unless there is some pressing challenge. There is the risk of OD&C practitioners becoming too focused on process and maybe not emphasizing outcome. Whereas on the other side of the coin, the CMC coin, where it becomes extremely important on data-driven recommendations for resolution and change. And what we've seen is perhaps an overcommitment around the accuracy of what they're recommending, what we recommend, around what will fix the problem. And perhaps there's an overconfidence or a misrepresentation around, if you follow this strategy, you will succeed. So somewhere in between, I think, is the right approach, where we make human-centric approaches a priority, but we also, as OD&C practitioners, have to be able to demonstrate that our interventions, our supports, are actually positively impacting the organization that has retained us. It's not enough to drive the best, most perfect dialogics or the participatory processes and say we have been successful. And Carol and I we've looked at, what is the evidence? And Dave, I think you would find this interesting. What is the evidence around when interventions happen? What is the success rate? And as we have looked at this, it ranges studies, empirical studies, around 24% to a range of 76%. Wow. But really the consensus is about a third of projects engaged by OD&C practitioners actually are successful in terms of the organization retaining you deems it to be a success. So we've got a long way to go in terms of demonstrating that we can have effect through our approaches. That's why I continuously advocate for a hybrid approach, because I think both approaches bring their strengths, and we can, work on some of the inherent weaknesses in our approaches.
Yeah. Got a couple of more minutes. Tony raised the question, what is success? And I suspect Frank and anyone else who's in this work, that's a negotiated answer, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think as a practitioner, though, there should be clarity on when you're being retained to support an organization, what the expected success is and should be defined. And as the we have strict ethical guidelines on the CMC side. When we sign on, there must be clearly articulated rules of engagement and what the outcomes are, and clearly articulated and signed upon between both parties.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you got a couple more minutes. Any more hands to be raised? Looking around. Okay. Jennifer again. Yeah.
I would just add in that from the CMC perspective, from the certified management consultant, a great deal of the work that's done in training certified management consultants is related to ethics, how you're going to treat the process in the organization. So that 8-hour exam that you write at the end of this, competency assessments and everything, it's all about ethics. And so when you have that brand of a certified management consultant, you're saying, I'm always going to do what is the right thing for the organization, and which is very important concept, I think, for OD&C consultants, because in OD&C, we're going deeper in the organization, we're having dialogue, and it becomes very easy to be persuaded by this group, this is what's the right thing to do, or that group, or that individual. And you need to remain with that good use of self, that neutral, objective voice of reason that's going to help the organization navigate through an ethical approach to get to what's right for the organization as a whole, right? So I think that's a very big distinguishing feature of certified management consultant.
Well, it's very helpful, Jennifer, to all three presentations.
Jennifer, sorry,
go ahead,
I'm,
Birgitt. You
I'm
have a chance to
sure,
respond.
Jennifer, that you didn't mean that those of us that aren't working in that way aren't committed to an ethical approach. I'm sure you didn't mean that.
Not at all. No, I'm just saying that, it's interesting because, sometimes there's been a lot of issues, I don't know about in the US, but in Canada with management consultants, and some management consultants not having such an ethical approach, or getting involved in, deals with government. And so there's been a lot of press in the Canadian news about management consultants working with the government and so on. So it's, to have that certified management consultant designation implies that you're going to be a consultant that works with high standards of ethics. That's all. And it's assumed that OD&C consultants would always do that, right? Yeah.
Okay, well, this has been wonderful. I want to ask Steve for a bit of summary and also a preview of further sessions. There's more to come. Steve?
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for doing such a nice job. And I echo Arielle's comments about your presence and what you bring to the conversation. Thank you for that. I would just say thank you to Heather. Wave your hand, Heather. She's our producer, director behind the scenes, making sure.
Yes, thank goodness for Heather.
Yeah, thank goodness for that. She took this. She collaborates with Lisa, and they do a lot of the producing and so forth. And so the two of them do that. So thank you, Heather, for your work. I would say that I think that the connection's always interesting to see how when people show up, the connections start just happening. You can see this cross-pollinating of ideas. But I do think it's because of this, what I would say is the human-centered or centric living systems perspective is how I would, it's a long word. I wish I wouldn't know how to make it a newer word, but I guess we'll have to say the regenerative perspective. But I love that. And I think, Birgitt, your comments, and your insight and your notion of presence, just starting out with, hey, touch your forehead, touch your heart, be mindful, bring your heart into this, bring your whole self into that. Really appreciate that. And Frank, your enthusiasm for really making sure that people are a part of what we do is important, and hopefully we can help people do that. So I think the connections were really great, and everybody's comments were awesome, and it's good to see all my friends from all over the world, because lots of people here from everywhere. So it's really, really cool. So thanks again, Dave, for your good work.
Well, and you're all on the mailing list, so you'll see announcements of each Thursday in the rest of this month. And I hope you will come back refreshed and ready for more learning. But thank you all. And this concludes our class.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.